You're teeing me up for a really good thing I can preach here.
Nice.
You don't actually have to wait till you're really hurt to get help. Don't wait too long to go to therapy. The classic thing we see in couples therapy is a couple won't seek out professional help until they're at the point of divorce. And they'll come into that first couples session and they'll look at the therapist and say, "Fix us." And they've got the unsigned divorce papers next to them because people wait longer than they should. I would give clients permission to cuss me out if they needed to. And it happened one time in particular, and it ended up being this turning point in therapy. They could be totally honest and someone would hold space for them.
Okay. So thank you so much for being here, Jake. I'm really excited because oh no, are you okay?
I'm fine, but I did just spill coffee on my pants.
It's okay. So I'm excited because I feel like there's a lot of things that we can talk about. I kind of want to talk about like your YouTube channel potentially. I kind of also want to talk about a lot about mental health and like therapy, because I think you're the first therapist that I've ever had, not a serious conversation, but where I can really just sit down and learn from them. So I'm really excited about that. So first off, could you kind of share what kind of therapist you are? Because I know that there's like a lot of different divisions and sects and stuff. So yeah, tell us about what kind of therapist you are.
Yeah. So what I've learned about different types of therapists is they all just call themselves therapist, if that's in their title. So I've told people I'm a therapist before who, don't really know me when I'm introducing myself. And they've said, "Oh, you do massages." And I go, no, it's not that massage.
Maybe mental massages?
Right? Oh, yeah, sometimes. Kind of. Or other people assume, "Oh, you're an occupational therapist." Right?
Oh, okay.
I go, nope, not that. Very different.
Uh-huh.
So yes, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Okay. What kind of patients do you talk to when it comes to a marriage family therapist? Because for me, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you just help people in their marriage, but I'm sure it's deeper than that. So what kind of patients and what kind of conversations do you have with people?
Yeah. So in my field, I work in the mental health field. There's a whole bunch of different job titles that we all kind of do the same thing. So you've got your psychologists, you've got your social workers, you've got professional clinical counselors, and you've got marriage and family therapists. I hope I'm not missing anybody. Okay. We all do the same thing. We can all provide psychotherapy.
Okay.
Not all of us in those different fields will practice psychotherapy, like especially social workers. Sometimes they do more community stuff. But we all can do the same job. We get different focuses in our training. And some of us go to so psychologists need a doctorate, right? So they go to school a little bit longer than we do. MFTs like myself, we get a master's degree. Some people go on to get a doctorate if they want to for whatever reason. I myself am just a master.
Just a master?
Just a master. A humble master. And so, so for myself, it's a little misleading, marriage and family therapy, because most of us work primarily with individual clients, right? We talk to one person at a time for a, 45 to 50 minute session, once a week or however often the person's coming in. And so for me, I like to see a broad spectrum of clients when it comes to like different elements of diversity. So like men, women, and people from different backgrounds and, cultural groups and things like that. And then I also see a big spread on ages. And so not all therapists are like this. Like some people, really focus on maybe certain problems, right? Like I'm really good at helping people with addiction or major mental illness, like schizophrenia. Or I'm a real OCD specialist.
Wow. Okay.
So for me, I like to mix it up because it's more fun, keeps me more engaged. So like selfishly, it's just interesting that way. And so in a given day, I'll see anyone from the age of like 5 or 6 years old up to, someone who's later in life, like someone in their 70s or 80s.
Wow.
And I'll see
So everybody, essentially.
I'll see everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll work with couples. I'll work with like entire families at a time. Yeah.
So at what point does someone, I kind of think of therapists being like the mental health doctors, and you don't really see a doctor unless things are bad. Like you're really sick, or you got shot, or you got stabbed, then you go to the hospital.
Oh yeah.
And so it's not until something is big where you're like, oh, I need professional help. So what threshold do people have to cross in order for them to realize, oh, I need a professional's help? Because you're that professional. You're that person who people in their desperation will go to and say, what do I do? So what does that get kind of overwhelming for you to kind of be the last resort, I guess? Are you the last resort for a lot of people?
Kind of. You're teeing me up for a really good thing I can preach here.
Nice.
Is that, for mental health and your physical health, right, with your body, you don't actually have to wait till you're really hurt to get help, right? So, go to your doctors, people. Go get checked out. Go get your regular physicals.
Yeah.
And don't wait too long to go to therapy. The kind of classic thing we see in couples therapy, for example, is a couple won't seek out professional help until they're at the point of divorce, and they'll come into that first couples session and they will come in and they'll look at the therapist and say, fix us. And they've got the unsigned divorce papers next to them.
That's
right.
And that's happened to you.
Well, not the actual divorce paper.
Well,
thing,
right.
But it's just an illustration. Yeah. Yeah. Because people wait longer than they should. Right. If you're having trouble in your marriage, or if you're having trouble working out your issues, it's not going to hurt you to go talk to somebody.
Right. So at what point then would someone, or should somebody, consider therapy? Because if they should, it's like a regular checkup. You're using the analogy of it being connected to our physical health. Don't wait until you absolutely need a doctor, until you see a doctor.
Yeah. So
at what point then? Is it just, because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if I have issues, with my wife, or if I have issues with my mom or my dad, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to push through it. I'm going to communicate. So how do I know when I should get therapy, or how should someone know when they have reached a place where it's like, now's the best time for me to get therapy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a part of you that will feel like, despite your best efforts, things aren't getting better. And that could be your own intuition you listen to. That could be, the Holy Spirit working in you, kind of communicating that this might be a good time to go seek out help. It can be a really humbling thing to ask somebody for help.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what people do when they seek out counseling. And like, I know for myself, it took me a long time to actually get into therapy.
Really? Why? Get into therapy as in like enter as a therapist?
To like go in as a client or a patient.
Really?
Yeah.
Can we unpackage that a little bit?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. I was like, I don't know if I am allowed to ask.
No, I was like thinking and praying about what I wanted to, talk about, what I was comfortable sharing before coming in. So, yeah, for a little bit of my story, I grew up with very loving parents who didn't they weren't meant to stay together, right? They got divorced. I was very young. And so growing up, there was a lot I look back on and I say, oh, I should have gotten into counseling, or rather than should have, it would have been a good idea to go get some counseling when I was young. But I didn't. It really wasn't something we did in my family. It wasn't something anybody talked about. And so I really didn't even know therapy was an option. until I got into college. And I always kind of wanted to be in some kind of helping profession. I went into college and I studied biology. I really like science. And that didn't work out for a couple reasons. One was, kind of failing organic chemistry. Which
it's not fun from what I've heard.
Which really weeds people out, right? I really envy your friend, the chemist, in your first episode.
Yeah.
Who probably actually understood organic chemistry.
And he slept in his classes. And I'd have to, well, I wasn't in organic chemistry with him, but yeah, he's smart.
Yeah, incredible. That's really like God-given gift.
Yes, I agree.
Yes. And my other problem with going into medicine was I'm just so squeamish. So blood can really take me out.
It's different when you see it's like,
get lightheaded, would get nauseous. Yeah. I still did all those fun dissection labs in college though.
Yeah, those are fun.
Yeah. Got to cut open lots of animals.
Yeah, well,
for learning purposes, and yeah. I mean, there's like ethical stuff to talk about there, but things were handled, very humanely where I went to school. And that's gonna end up on a short, huh? Cut open lots of animals. And so, I realized, okay, maybe being a nurse, being a medical doctor wasn't the right route for me, and I finally took a psychology class. And I thought, whoa, this is fascinating. Yeah. And I love it. And I know you enjoy psychology too. So fun to learn about humans.
Yeah.
And I got really into it. I realized I understood it. I picked up on it pretty quick. It was a good confidence booster to feel like I really understood what I was learning about, especially after organic chemistry. And then I got an internship in San Diego. That was just an unpaid thing. I was helping with social media for a licensed marriage and family therapist down there. And it was super cool. I got to learn a lot about therapy. She kind of gave me, free reign to read all the books in her office and ask any questions about therapy.
Yeah.
And I thought, whoa, maybe I should do this. I still didn't go to therapy myself though. I didn't check it out as a patient. Until I got into graduate school. So I got all my prerequisites done, got into graduate school for a master's in clinical psychology. And part of those programs is they make you go to therapy.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. The idea is that you can't really expect someone to make big changes in their life unless you've needed to do that for yourself.
So it took you to go in. So in order for you to go to therapy, it took you to actually pursue work as a therapist.
Yes.
And you didn't exactly realize that you needed it until that period?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I can't wait. Okay. Continue.
And a lot, I think, went into that, right? Kind of culture of my family growing up. We just didn't talk about that. We didn't do that. And also, I think just pride goes into that, right? I was a confident kid and thought I could handle my problems. And I know I was always, willing to be direct and work through stuff. And so I thought why would I need therapy?
Right. So.
And I was blessed enough, I suppose, to not experience some of the things my clients experience at a young age of, like a massive life-threatening trauma or some kind of major mental illness or, something like a suicide attempt or something that gives you no other option but to go into therapy.
Right.
If that makes sense.
I think everybody needs a physical checkup. You should always get a physical checkup. Do you think then, seeing how you realized how important therapy was for you, do you think everybody needs to see a therapist for kind of like a checkup, do you think?
No, I don't think everybody needs a therapist or needs to see one. But I think probably everyone or almost everyone can at least benefit from it. Because in therapy, what you're doing is you're learning about yourself, you're, gaining insight, and you're, learning ways to work through your problems, mentally, emotionally, relationally. So you're getting a lot of good tools, and you're also getting help kind of unpacking and processing things that you might not be able to unpack and process on your own. So Does everybody need to go to therapy? No, but I haven't found someone yet that I would actively recommend they never go to therapy.
Interesting. You were mentioning pride. And I feel like that's an issue with people and kind of seeking therapy. Like, I'm fine, I don't need it, or it costs a lot of money.
Yep.
And I can see a lot of people making excuses for why they shouldn't be going to therapy. And so when I went, it was during COVID, during 2020, I was working as a teacher, and it was weird because it was after we started going back to school, all of these students, we would have these journals that I would leave room for students to kind of tell me about what it is that they're going through, or if they have questions for me, or if they need any help. And in a lot of those, I just saw there was a complete difference pre-COVID and post-COVID, and a bunch of students struggled with suicidal thoughts. And I had to have conversations with them. And for me, I always treated everything really seriously. And so I'm like, oh, let's talk, and so as I had those one-on-one conversations, they would sit down, I would talk to them. And I actually had to sit down, I think it was either with a dad and over the phone and everything, and just like letting him know, I'm like, hey, like your son's going through this and whatever. And, I was talking with the principal and I was talking with everything, but it's just mental health is such a huge thing. So I'm concerned right now because I'm thinking that we have listeners who are probably downplaying their mental health, and they're thinking, I'm fine. Or they're thinking, I can handle it, I can take care of it. Or they're thinking, I can't afford it. We have rent, I have things that we got to do, we have things we got to pay for. Like, I don't have time or the money to, even if I did want it, even if I did see my need, now I can't even afford this service. So how would you help navigate those people to kind of show them that they need therapy and they should start taking the steps to have therapy because they need help? How would you, I guess, encourage those people?
Yeah, it's a good question. By the way, your story about working as a teacher and giving them space to write about what they're going through, that's huge. That's huge. Everybody needs someone like that in their life. And that's where I think, like youth pastors and teachers can make such a difference in a kid's life. Like I didn't go to therapy when I was young, but I did have really good teachers. I did have some really great youth pastors, especially in high school. And it was so helpful to have someone outside the family who was a good mentor, a good role model, who you could be, honest and open with. So I'll answer your question too, but
yes, no.
But that's huge. We need more good teachers. But yeah, you're asking about the barriers to getting into therapy.
Yeah.
And, pride was one for me, and it's one for other people, but like you said, it's definitely not the only one. So there's logistical problems like time and money. And then there's also just personal issues, kind of like pride or fear or nervousness. Could feel nervous about being judged. You could feel nervous about having a bad experience in therapy. And there's also even cultural things that can keep people from going into therapy, right? Depending if your culture might be more, say, collectivistic and really value handling things just within the family and value keeping things in the family. Could be a generational thing, right? The number of like family secrets we've uncovered over time as we've looked at our own, family's stories, me and my wife, as we've, talked to people and realized like, whoa, this is what people, a couple generations ago were dealing with in our family. That's crazy. We had no idea.
Wow.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of barriers that can get in. For the logistical ones, so let's say, time and money. one thing that it's important to do is to kind of try to prioritize values, right? Like if, say, suicide is something on the table, that means someone could possibly die if they don't get help.
Yes.
And you can't really put a price on someone's life,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's scary to open up to someone, to kind of bare your heart to someone and not know how it's going to go. And I could talk, more about vulnerability and its important place in therapy.
Right.
But what I often say to my clients to validate how nervous it makes someone to open up is that if you think about vulnerability, we think about this in our modern American culture right now where mental health is more promoted, like vulnerability is a good thing.
Yeah.
But if you think about, an animal in the wild, you think about a bunny rabbit and it's feeling vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
That's a bad thing.
Right.
It's exposed. It could be hurt. It could be taken care of.
It's full of fear
maybe.
and like freaking out.
Yeah. But there's a part of us that really is afraid of what could happen if we expose ourselves in that way.
Our weakest selves to a degree too.
Yeah, exactly. I could keep going on that, but let me actually answer your question first about what I would say to people who are experiencing those barriers with going into therapy, right? The personal ones. And another one, personal, can be just cultural and generational, right? So in some cultures, people tend to be a little less likely to go into therapy, especially if the culture tends to be more collectivistic. And in those cultures, often the idea is you want to handle things within the family, right? And we're all here to support each other. So I've had clients who, eventually made their way into therapy tell me, I told my mom I was going to go into therapy, and she said, well, why would you go to therapy? You can talk to me about stuff. Like I'm your parent, right? Just talk to me.
Right.
And that's valid and that's fine. And one of the strengths of a culture like that is that people really take care of each other, right? You don't put your elderly in a home, you take care of them until they pass. And so, yeah, there's a big variety of barriers. I can go through kind of briefly ways to like touch on how to answer some of these barriers, because I think they all have an answer. Yeah. And they are all, they all can be overcome.
I think that's actually huge, because I think that I remember hearing, I think it was from Simon Sinek. He was giving an answer or an illustration or he was telling about his experience about bagels and how there was a huge line of like free bagels. And so he would see this huge line. He was like, oh my goodness, bagels, And so he would like come up, and as everyone was waiting in line, he would just kind of like reach out and put his hand in the bag and like take a bagel. And essentially what he was communicating was like, okay, well, they're free bagels. People are waiting in line so they can like choose their own bagel, but he forfeited his choice to just get a free bagel, And so his buddy, I guess, didn't want to go get a bagel. So he was just, I guess what he was trying to say was he only saw the bagel but his friend only saw the obstacle, the long line. And so I guess when it comes to therapy, you're saying that there is an answer to this barrier. There is something that's preventing people from getting something that would be so beneficial for them. And what you're saying is whatever that barrier is, there is a way to overcome it so that you can get the help that you need. And I think that's just kind of relieving, because for people who only look at the line and only look at the barrier, for them to come to the realization that they could overcome it, I think is just so huge and necessary. So I think that's big. And I love that you said there is an answer to the barrier. I just kind of wanted to highlight that for a little bit.
Yeah. Call me an idealist because that is a little bit of how I work as a therapist, right? Sure. I'm not 100% an idealist. I I can be realistic, and I know that some of these barriers can be huge. Right. Some of the barriers to getting help. And I do believe there's an answer to it. And I feel the same way about a lot of our mental health and relationship issues. They can be huge, and they can be really challenging, and they can be totally crippling. But I always believe there's hope, and there's a way forward, and that healing is possible.
Right. So how then, if you were to give a brief how to overcome step by step, maybe 2 or 3 steps, how to overcome that logistical barrier? No time, no money.
Yeah. So thankfully, there's different options. The time one is tricky. It's going to mean probably moving things around in your life. And it could mean reaching out for help, right? Maybe that means like trying to get a shift covered. Maybe it means opening up to your boss about why you can't come in on this day at this time. Maybe it's going to mean using sick time or something like that. And the money one, there's actually lots of possible answers, right? So, you can go through health insurance, which a lot of people end up doing.
Yeah.
And you also can, you also still can try to see someone that accept payment out of pocket, which where I work, I work at a place called Journeys Counseling Ministry, and we're a nonprofit Christian counseling center. And I don't believe anybody is on any health insurance panels, so we don't take insurance, but we can see, like someone can come to Journeys and get therapy regardless of finances.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's because, we've got people who have donated. So we even have like a scholarship fund that can help, people get in.
Wow.
And we have a great relationship with a lot of churches. So sometimes the church will help fund someone's therapy. And the fees also vary because we've got therapists at different levels of training, right? Okay. We've got people like myself who are licensed. We've got people who, could, their fees a little bit higher than mine because they've been licensed for longer than me and they have a ton of experience. Then we have people who are working on their hours and out of school, and we've got people in school. Right. And people in school, it's a pretty low fee usually. And you're still going to see someone who's supervised by somebody licensed.
Got it.
If that makes sense. So, and then there's even like options like if you can't see someone through insurance, you can do what they call a super bill. You can see somebody like myself and we can give the insurance company a receipt and say, look, we couldn't find anybody through insurance, so please try to reimburse the person for therapy. So there's a lot of logistical ways to kind of like get past the financial piece of therapy.
Right.
And I try to be a resource for people who reach out, whether they're my client yet or not. I try to be a resource for them that like I'm going to help you get into therapy and see somebody. Because it also can be a daunting process if you're trying to find a therapist and you keep calling people and they say, sorry, I don't have availability.
Right. How about people who have the time, have the money, and have the heart and they want to do it, but now you're talking about that vulnerable state. So it's kind of like, how do you know if a certain therapist is a good therapist? So how would you help them navigate? Because they're going to be bearing their heart and soul to these strangers, So how could what steps would you have people take so that they can confide in someone that is trustworthy? Is everyone with a license trustworthy, or are there some steps that you have in mind?
Well, I would like to think everyone with a license is trustworthy, but it's just not the case. I mean, we see it, like sometimes therapists get in trouble for things that are like unethical and stuff like that. And so, no, I mean, we're human, right? We're human. It's like not all pastors are trustworthy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they should be. Yeah. Right. And same with therapists and same with your doctors. And so I think if you're worried about whether or not a therapist is trustworthy, and this is just like, they're just maybe not trustworthy in general. There's also the thing if you don't know if your therapist is a good fit for you, right? I consider myself someone who's ethical and does things, by the book and the right way. And I'm careful and I'm respectful and try to be responsible. But I'm still not the best fit for all my clients. Right. And I've come to that conclusion and decision with clients before, or my client has just decided that and said, like, I really don't think you're the right fit. I'm going to go, look for someone else. And I'll say, okay, like, let's figure out what would be a good fit for you. Let's try to talk it through and I'll get you to somebody that can help. But yeah, so how do you know if someone is just going to be trustworthy or a good fit for you? I think it's important to, try to talk to them on the phone before your appointment, try to hear them out, feel out, how they talk and what their approach might be. And, you can ask the therapist personal questions. They don't have to answer.
Right.
They can skate around it if they want. It's nice for me because if people ask me certain personal questions, like, I work at a ministry, right? It's a nonprofit Christian counseling center. So it's kind of assumed I'm Christian, and it gives me the kind of freedom a little bit to be a bit more honest with that.
Yeah.
A bit more honest with clients about that like, yeah, I'm a Christian. It's no surprise. I work here, right? I think everybody that works here is Christian. And so there can be things like that are what we want to figure out about a client. Sometimes just knowing they have some shared values with me or shared beliefs can be helpful. And also just like trust your gut when you talk to someone. Okay. And if you're getting a weird vibe or you feel like they're not really listening well, then it's okay to move on. It's okay to try to talk to somebody else. And it's also okay to just directly tell the therapist. It's going to be very anxiety provoking, but I give my clients permission, like, tell me how I'm doing and please tell me if I'm messing up. It'll only benefit you. It'll only benefit the therapy. I mean, it might even help me grow as a therapist.
I see.
In the first session, I actually usually tell clients, I'll tell you exactly what I tell them. After I go through the whole thing about confidentiality and what to expect in therapy, and I talk about it being a Christian counseling center and how, my role is not pastor, my role is counselor. I'm here to help them work through their issues and meet their goals. I'll tell them that I really appreciate feedback and that they can, like, I really want them to tell me how things are going, to tell me if they feel like they're making progress or not, to tell me if I offend them. And I used to work in the rehab space. And so when I was there working in rehab with our inpatient clients, they were often either experiencing really intense mental illness or coming off drug and alcohol abuse. And so this was more likely they would do it there than at Journeys where I work now.
Yeah.
But I would give clients permission to cuss me out if they needed to.
And let
me have it. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. It happened. Not that often, but it's happened. And it happened one time in particular where someone, got real mad at me. This is in the rehab, got real mad at me and just totally cussed me out and insulted me in various colorful ways. And then they walked out of the therapy session. And then, so that was the end of that session.
Yeah.
In our next session, we talked about it. I think we both apologized. I think we both cried a little. And it ended up being this turning point in therapy. And I think it was a really important thing for this person to experience, that they could be totally honest. They could even be a bit confrontational, and someone would hold space for them. And I think it was a really healing moment.
I think feedback is so important. And I remember when I was trying to learn how to actually lead a mission team. And I remember people who would bring, or leaders, mission team leaders who would bring people to whatever country. I think it was somewhere in South America when I asked them. And one of the first things they said was, be open to feedback. And at the very end, I actually probably should have asked you guys for feedback. But they said, make sure you allow yourself to be completely vulnerable with everybody and ask, how could this mission trip have been improved? And I remember loving that feedback because I did that with all of my old classes that I taught. And at the very end of each semester, I would give them these anonymous papers, and I'm like, don't write your name, just fill them out. And I would break down my classroom into all the different sections, because we would have a different schedule for like Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and everything. And Thursdays in particular were lecture days. And nearly all of my students, they would be like, I love Mondays, because it's like, we called it Why Mondays. And on Why Mondays, it was just one of those things where I was like, why do we have to come to school on Monday? So I made it a little bit easier because it was like a minimum day. So we had like a shorter class period. And so what we did was they would write anonymous questions, and then they could ask me about anything, So it was during that time where I would just like go through all the questions, and they don't have to open their backpacks. They just have to like take out their Bibles. They read really fast. They read their chapter. After they read their chapter, then I just read questions. So I made it as easy as possible for them. And so they loved that. They loved Fridays, but all of them said lectures are boring. And like, for the most part, I think I'm a somewhat engaging speaker, and I wasn't talking for very long. It was only like 12 minutes. But when everybody says they're boring, it's like, oh no. And so I changed it. I changed it, and I told them all, like, not told them, but I started shifting things, and I started making it a lot more engaging. I started speaking for like 5 minutes now, or maybe even 2 minutes at a time. But then I would kind of tell them like, okay, I want you to teach this concept. And then they started loving it all over again. And so like our classroom wouldn't have evolved to that point where they enjoyed our lecture days, where I made them lecture so that they can own the material. That wouldn't have come if it weren't for feedback. So I didn't know that therapy can actually, it's almost kind of like a classroom where it's like, it's not just my therapy session to you, but it's also like the person's therapy session who's getting therapy. It's like they also have charge and kind of how it goes and where it goes, and to give them their feedback. Yeah, all I have to say. I really respect that. I'm sorry, I'm a little long-winded.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I love that story. That's such a good story. I love how you did something that I think more teachers of young people like could do, is take their feedback and give them a stake in the class and a stake in their learning.
Yes.
It's genius. And, unfortunately, like, I think some kind of old school thinking about teachers is like, well, I need to get this information in your brain.
Right.
So whether you like it or not, sit down and shut up and listen.
Right.
And you didn't do that.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool. And, actually research shows that the best way to learn something is to teach it to someone else.
Yes.
So you were doing that. You were also going by what the research about teaching shows.
Yes.
Which is what we try to do in therapy too, right? We try to stay current as we can about mental health, about therapy, about different interventions. We are always doing some kind of like training and learning and trying to improve our skills.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing to do so that you stay a bit current and you don't get too stale and stagnated in the work that you're doing.
That's smart. Especially, it reminds me of YouTube, because YouTube is this organic thing that's always changing. And we were talking about this earlier, but you never want to be a YouTuber who thinks that you just have it all together, because your audience will change. Culture will change. Values will change. And you kind of always need to be aware of the trends, and you always need to be aware of what people are struggling with. And so I think it's so wise for not just teachers, but I think every profession, needs to always be learning and growing. Like I remember when CPR changed, before it was airway breaths and then compressions, where it's like, oh, you look for signs of breathing? Oh, they're not breathing? Okay, then you do compressions. Now it's CAB, Now you jump right into compressions because doctors and their research realized that too many people were like spending too much time looking for breaths when that person really just needed blood to be like pumped into their body and oxygenate everything. So I was just like, wow, that's important. That's needed. So I am just so fascinated with your line of work. I want to dive a little bit deeper. Can you tell me, if we were to talk about the different kinds of patients that you help counsel, what are the different categories? You know, like people who are getting divorced, I feel like would be a category. Maybe there'd be a subcategory. I'm not sure. But can you tell me, if you were to break things down into, I don't know, however many categories you want to, but like the typical patients, or at least, I don't want to say the typical, but the ones that you see very, very often, and you're always kind of offering therapy to these kinds of people?
Yeah, for sure. And I know we talked about this before we're talking, but I can say it for the audience too, that, you know, therapy is kept confidential. And so nothing I share is going to give away who I'm talking to or working with, because it's important. They trust me that when they tell me things, it stays in the room.
Yes.
And I you know, keep that information safe. And I always say, like, you know, the caveat always is, unless there's a safety concern, right? If someone's thinking of killing themselves, we got to get them help.
Yes.
Right. We got to bring in usually some kind of outside resource or get them to a hospital or something. And same if they're going to try to hurt somebody else, we got to let people know.
Yeah.
Or, you know, there's abuse and stuff like that. But you're a teacher, you know about abuse reporting.
Yeah. My abuse reporting is very simple, though. It's as soon as I hear something that's like killing or hurting yourself, it's like, principal, I need help. Like, that's kind of it.
Yeah. And early on as therapists, like, what's nice is we get to do that too, because we have supervisors before we're licensed. And so you go to your supervisor every time and you go, do I need to call this in?
Exactly.
What do I do here? How do I address this? And it's really helpful. And even once you're licensed, we still seek consultation and, you know, keep things confidential, but say like, look, I've got a client that just told me this, like, you know, I think I might need to call this in, but I'm not sure. And so it's always great that you don't have to work on an island.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, I see people of all ages with kind of different presenting issues. Where I work, we get a lot of referrals from local churches in particular. Okay. My kind of, I guess, bread and butter, or what I'm kind of like known for, is I work a lot with young people. I work with kids and teenagers. And, you know, as a male therapist working with kids and teens, that's a bit more rare. So it's a really good niche I've found.
Why is it rare?
Well, you get a lot more, I think you just get a lot more female therapists that are working with that population for whatever reason. And so that's been great. I kind of fell into that early in my training. You know, we all have to see, you need, for licensure, it's 3,000 hours total, but 500 of those for MFTs have to be, you know, kids, couples, or families. So I was smart, and this is my advice for, you know, young therapists or therapists early in their training, is get those kid hours first. Yeah. So you don't get stuck with, I got 3,000 hours, but only 200 of those are kids, because then it can take a long time to actually get all the hours of that population. And so I realized how much I loved doing that, working with young people. And it's so much fun. Can be very heartbreaking too, especially if kids are being, you know, mistreated, and when they're going through things that are often outside their control. So I see a lot of kids of divorce. That's really common. Just a common reason people are coming into therapy. Yeah. I'm usually seeing the kid for therapy after the parents have divorced, or like during that separation process. And it can be really good for them to be in therapy, because I can be kind of a stable and supportive and encouraging, and loving figure in their life, and a sense of consistency.
So the first category is people who have parents that are divorced.
Yeah. And I mean, young people in general.
Yeah.
Right. So kids and teens, I see a lot of those. The other population I see quite a bit is just adult men. in general. When I was working in the rehab space, I got a lot of experience with men in particular. I was working in like the men's inpatient rehab house. And so, really like working with men, myself as a man. There's like always these, things we can relate to on a personal level. And I got a lot of experience working with addiction in particular.
Okay.
So I'd say those are kind of like my 3 things that I get a lot of referrals for is people going through addiction, especially men, adult men in general, and then minors. So people under 18.
Got it. So so let's unpackage, I guess, the typical problems that you regularly have to help navigate people through.
Yeah.
So when it comes to addictions, then what kind of addictions, and when these men come to you, because I feel like I do want to touch the divorce one, but in my mind, I feel like, okay, that makes sense in my mind. But with these men, what problems do they come into or have in their life to where they're like, oh, I need a therapist. I need to talk to someone about this.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of everything. Addiction is so common and so rampant. Addiction's just really never gone away over, I think, the course of history. And that can be anything from alcohol to drugs, to gambling, to other addictive behaviors like pornography. And so I see that a lot. I actually, at this point, when a client tells me they're struggling with pornography, a part of me actually chuckles a little bit because I go, oh, of course you are. It's so common. It's so common, especially for men, and teen boys, to experience this and to go through a very similar journey. So many people go through this where, this, you kind of get introduced to it at a young age. Either you stumble across it or somebody shows you some stuff and you become, interested in it, and then it becomes kind of a regular part of your life, and then it just kind of remains a part of your life until it starts to cause problems. And that's kind of how a lot of addictions develop, especially the ones that are not, say, illegal drugs, where, the first time you're doing cocaine or shooting up heroin, this is at least against the law. This is something I could get in trouble for. And this is probably hurting my body in some way.
Yeah.
Or things that are legal, right? So now that's like alcohol, that's cannabis. Maybe it's, nicotine and tobacco, gambling and pornography. These things often they're not killing you right away. Right? It's something that's a part of your life, and it's, feels in some ways normal and okay. Pornography in particular, especially among Christian circles. I find a lot of clients have kind of like what the world says and what the church says, right? And they're polar opposites. So they're getting like mixed messages all the time, right? The church's message has kind of always been like, don't do that. And unfortunately, it's usually a very taboo thing and a thing that can bring up a lot of shame for people.
Yeah.
And then the world says, this is normal, this is fine, and this is what sex is, and this is what relationships are.
Yeah.
And those are very conflicting messages that someone just carries in them. And when you have that kind of conflicting message within you, this friction happens, and it creates this anxiety and this angst, and really can stir up a lot of shame for someone.
So, wow. We might need an episode 2, Jake. Because I don't know how we're going to, I feel like I'm going to have to organize this in a very particular way in order for us to kind of talk about. I feel like you laid out all of these things that I just want to dive deep into all of these, because here's my thinking. You have people who have divorced parents. You have people who struggle with drugs. You have people who struggle with alcohol. You have people who struggle with pornography. I also want to talk about people who struggle with suicide. We have all of these different categories, and here's my problem. Here's my dilemma. we probably have a lot of people who are like listening and are going to listen and are thinking like, that particular category is me. I want to hear what Jake has to say about that particular thing.
Yes, you're right, Miles. There are so many reasons people, come into therapy. And as we talked about, there's a lot of reasons that keeps them from coming in, even though it'd be a really good idea for them to come in. And we could spend entire podcast episodes
on just one of those
multiple entire podcast episodes. We could start a whole podcast, on addiction, or on just the issue of pornography, or on depression, on thoughts of suicide, on anxiety. I got so many thoughts on anxiety, and trauma, right? And then, and the list goes kind of on and on and on and on.
Right.
And those are all just really common ones that I see, right? There's other ones that come up. Someone comes in with obsessive compulsive disorder, right? OCD.
We just did a YouTube video on that. I'm really...
Oh, I need to check it out.
Yeah. Scrupulosity.
Okay.
How it's kind of a growing thing. I didn't realize there is a growing population of Christians who have scrupulosity, and they just feel like they can lose God's love and lose God's favor, and they're just always questioning their salvation. So it's like a huge thing. Okay, so didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay.
I want to help people. So our podcast is called Practical Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because for me, in my mind, it really just caters to me, because I like when someone just tells me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, just give it to me straight. I just want to know. Tell me how to pray and how to read and everything. And so let's it's going to be a little difficult, but we're going to try to do it, okay? We're going to cover all of these little topics, and we're going to try to be concise, and I'm going to ask you, okay, and we'll start with divorced parents. We'll start with that one, okay? If someone has divorced parents, I guess I would want to know, what advice would you give to them? And I think part of solving the problem is helping them to understand their problem a little bit. Because I feel like some people who are like, I have divorced parents, but kind of like you said, you didn't realize you needed therapy, or maybe not needed therapy, but like could have benefited greatly from therapy.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess we're going to do two things. I'm going to give a topic to you, and then you're going to kind of explain their situation and explain what the problem could possibly be. And then you're going to give them a quick encouragement on some things that they could do that can come from a therapist, like therapy exclusive tips. Because I think the reason why I want to do this is because I want to try to convince people to get therapy. There's probably people who are going to be listening to this who are like, I'm fine, or I don't have the money, or whatever. But maybe we could either do one of two things through this little segment. Is we could either give them the little bit of help that can help encourage them where they're at right now from an actual therapist, or we can kind of get them to taste therapy a little bit. And they're like, I need more of this in my life, and it might help direct them to get more therapy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can we start with something that's slightly off?
Sure.
Hey, I know you're open to feedback, Miles, right?
I am. Go ahead.
I'm not hijacking the podcast. Don't worry.
No, I love this.
I am the captain now. This is called Practical Christianity, right? Yes. This is all about how you practice your faith. Maybe let's talk a little bit first about what it means for Christians to go to therapy.
Yes. Yeah, I do want to hear that.
I think that's a good place to start, just based on like the people who are probably listening to this podcast. And what I've loved about it as I've been listening to this podcast is hearing people talk about how they practice their faith and what their faith means to them in their field. And so for the people, listening who either are in therapy or thinking about checking out therapy, I think there's a really important intersection between the Christian faith and asking for help. I mean, it's central to what we believe, right? That we need help, that we can't fix ourselves, right? We can't be saved on our own. We need Jesus.
Yeah.
And, and Jesus is called Wonderful Counselor, right? And so I think for most Christians, there's a part of us that is already open to asking for help because we do that with God. I mean, hopefully we're doing that with God.
Yeah.
Right. I think he wants us to. And that's what can be really meaningful as a therapist who's a Christian, is really assisting and being a part of that healing journey for people.
I always knew God was a wonderful counselor. And as you were thinking or talking about that, I think that's a very profound thought because, like, for me, I'm a teacher. And at the same time, God is our teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But God gives us teachers in our life to help encourage us. Like, I have benefited from amazing teachers, but God is my teacher.
Yeah.
So to a degree, these teachers have been used by God to help encourage me. And so now when it comes to counselors, I never really thought about that, but like, God is the God of wisdom, God is the God of love, and God is the God of counsel. And for you in your job, you are kind of fulfilling who God is in other people's lives to a degree. Like, God is the counselor and you are a counselor that is using his strengths to help guide God's people. And I think that on our other YouTube channel, Impact, one of the things that I do is I try to talk about a topic and I identify the distinction between how people see this topic and how the Bible sees that topic. So I'll talk about worship and our video worship. I'll say like, oh, people just think it's a song. We just worship God. You raise your hands. You have an emotional response. You sit back down, and that's worship. And I kind of rebuke that and say, that's not all of worship. That can be worship, but worship means to bow down in submission. It means to surrender. Because when Jesus was when he was correcting and rebuking Satan, because when Jesus was in the wilderness, Satan says, oh, all these things I'll give you if you bow down and worship me. And Jesus said, away with you, Satan. You should only bow down and worship God. Satan wasn't asking Jesus to sing him a song.
Right.
He was asking for complete surrender. So I love when you were bringing up therapy, how it's connected to us asking for help. Like, it is so absolutely needed. And I feel like, even for me, I think for myself personally, there's a lot of reasons why I could definitely benefit from therapy. And I think that I have to be honest and I have to probably say, part of me immediately thinks like money. I can't afford it. And there have been many times also in the past where I've gotten in like arguments with Abigail, and we considered like, oh, maybe we should get therapy. But like, being stubborn, I've said I'm fine. I'll push through it. I'll work through it. And just kind of hearing you about how I need to view it biblically. Therapy at its core, I think, is just humbling yourself and asking for help and submitting yourself under the counsel of someone who cares about you and has a unique experience that you can largely benefit from.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing the Bible into it. Because for me, I'm just like, oh, I can learn. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. We are practical Christianity. So I appreciate us kind of coming back to the Christian roots. I think for this one, it's just it's a little explicit. It's like, oh yeah, like this is just counsel and advice. So it's like it's already practical. But thank you for bringing the Christianity back.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, and good job to you too, Miles. I love that self-reflection you're doing right now is an important step to healing in general. It's a crucial step to asking yourself, like, do I need to get into therapy? And also asking, would I benefit from therapy?
Mm-hmm.
Those are actually different questions. They're both crucial though.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, and it's hard, like saying I need therapy, like to me often means, and I can get really extreme with stuff because I work a lot with anxiety and I struggle with some anxiety myself, is like, it's life or death, right? So if you're going to kill yourself if you don't go to therapy, I think you need therapy, right? And like, short of that, often it's usually, yeah, you could definitely benefit. It would be very helpful.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of us, and I'm in this camp, like I benefit from it, right? And it's super helpful. So I would say like, it's not always necessarily do I need it, but like, would this really help me? And is it going to be really worth my time? Miles, you do so well in therapy. You love to talk.
Yeah. I think I got a little ahead of myself. I really want to go into the little segment where we talk about all these different things, but I'm glad that you kind of paused a little bit so we can just kind of talk about God and our walks. So before we kind of go into that, can you share like how it is that you became a Christian?
Yeah. I can share my testimony.
Yeah, share your testimony. I want to hear it.
That's fun. Yeah, so like I said, I grew up in essentially two houses since I can remember, right? And so one side of my family, we, really just didn't go to church. We would celebrate all the Christian holidays. It's still that way on that side of the family. And, I was baptized in the Lutheran church as a baby, and I was kind of actually through that side of the family. But I think for them, it was always like church was really, it's very traditional and stuffy and old school. And so just not something we really participated in all that much. I mean, we wouldn't even go to church on Easter. So there's something for that, but we'd celebrate it.
Yeah.
We'd hide the eggs and, do all that. And then other side of the family, we were kind of almost in this journey of like trying to figure church out for a long time. And when I can kind of share which side of the family this is to keep it a little clear. So my dad's side of the family, we don't really go to church. Okay. We usually spend Sundays like at the beach. So real fun. We get that good quality family time. We weren't really involved in church very much. And then on my mom's side, we would go to church. And I grew up with a Bible that I would just like try to read. Thankfully, I was blessed with a high reading level as a kid, so I could at least read, if not fully comprehend what was going on. And we were kind of in and out of different churches through my upbringing, but I really never felt at home in a particular church. But I definitely believed in God from a very young age. And there were certain things that I heard in sermons that really stuck with me. And one of them was the consistency of God, right? And that God is, never changing. And for a kid who was, going from like, switching houses every Monday, right? A week at dad's and a week at mom's, and pack up a few essentials that I, didn't have at both places, usually school stuff and sports stuff and things like that. Like things didn't feel super consistent, and, it felt like I was kind of, moving around all the time. And so that was one thing that I think really drew me to God at a young age, was how like God is never changing. God is always there with me, and this one consistent part of my life. My younger brother got married last year, and he's my brother who we share the same mom, same dad. And so he and I were just the two of us moving back and forth house to house, until we went off to college. And I was best man at his wedding. And so I gave a speech last year. And one thing I said was how he was, the only person in my life who was with me like all the time growing up. And so we have a really special relationship because of that. And the only other one who was there too through all that was God. And that's funny. I don't actually think I've put that into words before. So thanks for letting me share the testimony. Yeah. It's funny how you can share your testimony so many times and it still can come out a little differently.
Yeah.
So then I really didn't find a church home until high school. I met my now wife. It was my first day of my junior year of high school, and I went into the AP calculus class, and I saw my wife Kelly just sitting there in the front of the room because she was a very good student and always a teacher's pet, and sitting at the front of the room, and I was late to class, and holding a big old Chipotle burrito because I think it was just after lunchtime.
Nice.
And because I was late, and it was the first day of school, the teacher made me stand in front of the class and introduce myself to the class.
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. And it was funny because, that's a bit of an embarrassing thing for anybody that age. But as cheesy as it sounds, I locked eyes with Kelly and just kind of felt something. I don't know if that's love at first sight or what, but I really felt something, and she did too, and we still talk about it to this day. And from then on, this is not getting our love story too much, but I would catch her staring at me across the room.
Nice.
Our first time really hanging out, she'd invited me to Young Life a couple times.
And Young Life is a youth group?
Yeah. So Young Life is it's a Christian organization. It's a really, really cool one. And it does a lot of outreach, especially with kids who are not like quite in church yet.
Okay.
So it's not through any church. It's just an organization. And, but they do these get-togethers and hangouts, and it's kind of like a youth group that's just like not, run through a church. And usually it's like, often hosted at someone's house. And you do kind of a lot of really fun kind of stuff you do in a youth group, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of preaching, a little bit of like maybe musical worship in there. But it's usually a lot of fun. There's hangouts, there's camps, there's get-togethers and stuff like that. So, and because of that, it's a really good way to like start introducing people to Jesus. So my wife always says she was evangelizing. Mm-hmm. She wasn't asking me out, she was evangelizing.
Got it.
And so we went to a skate night, a Young Life skate night, and we rollerbladed, in circles, and it was really fun. And so through her, I got plugged into Young Life, and I got plugged into a church that I had never been to before, and I got to check out their youth group. Mm. And prior to this youth group, I never felt super connected at other youth groups. These other youth groups weren't really, like, there was nothing wrong with them, especially the leaders were, often really cool and really nice, and, they're youth pastors, right? Mm-hmm. We know the youth pastor type, right? In another life, I'd totally be a youth pastor.
I could see that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But when I would try out youth groups prior to this one I went to with my wife, I just never really clicked and connected with other people, and there'd be, kind of friend groups and cliques, and I just feel kind of outcast, and usually I just wouldn't want to go back. Now this one though, I already had a couple friends that were going and made a lot of friends really quick, and the youth pastors were phenomenal, and I felt so at home, and I really felt this sense of community for the first time at a church. And after that, I decided to like it just helped me really go a lot deeper with my faith once I found that community.
Yeah.
So I got to go on a really cool backpacking trip to the Grand Canyon and
That's
have
cool.
a supai.
Uh-huh.
And it was an amazing trip, and I got rebaptized there. And then
How old were you?
I was 18.
Okay.
And then I, so wanted to keep pursuing my faith and higher learning at the same time. So I went to Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, beautiful campus. And then, and then I even continued that once I realized I wanted to become a therapist. And I went to Vanguard University in Costa Mesa, which is also a Christian school. And so, yeah, I guess that's a little bit of kind of how I became a Christian and kind of, I guess, where I'm at today. And through Vanguard, it's been really cool to learn how to incorporate faith into the work I do as a therapist as well. And really special and meaningful aspect of the work for me personally.
I could see kind of how around the time that you, I guess, started walking a little bit more, more intentionally, assertively with God. Because it was right around that time that you kind of started going to college, and it was around that time that you also started figuring out, oh, maybe I can be a therapist and everything. So it was just kind of like a pretty, in sync, you just kind of kept on going. And I think that your Christian background, like you're not just a therapist, you're also connected to the God of all wisdom who understands, just a lot of important lessons. I think I read this one thing, I forgot, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I read something along the lines of, I think 90% of counsel, or at least maybe not 90, a lot of counsel that therapists give can be rooted in like the Sermon on the Mount, like with Jesus talking about loving your enemies, and prayer. And I forgot exactly what it said, but it broke down all of the concepts that Jesus taught in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. But if you were to kind of break it down, where it says, do not worry. Therefore I say to you, do not, this is Matthew chapter 6:25. Don't worry about your life, because God, who knows all that you need, all of these things, will provide it. So if you kind of break down all of these concepts at its root, a lot of what therapists say kind of can be rooted or found. Similar truths can be found in the Bible. So all of that to say, I guess I'm saying is, for one, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and see if it's actually accurate, because I'm not sure if, part of me feels like there's a lot of just obviously a ton of wisdom here, but ones that come up off the top of my head is just like gratitude, be thankful for everything. And we see that in 1 Thessalonians 5, and in Philippians 4, it says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication. And then with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known. And then there's also other things about confiding in people in James 5, where it says, confess your trespasses to one another so that you may be healed. So I just feel like the Bible is just this ultimate resource of just all this wisdom and everything. And so you not only have your own professional experience as a therapist, but you also have biblical knowledge. So you know the source of the knowledge and of the wisdom. So you kind of, I feel like you're a super therapist because you understand that, I think.
Well, thank you, Miles. Jake, the super therapist.
Yes.
I'll take it. I'm going to start wearing a cape to my appointments.
Perfect.
It's going to really throw off my, especially my older clients. They're going to be like,
what's going on?
It's not Halloween anymore.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. I think, it's possible we might offend lots of, psychology researchers and people that write self-help books and stuff by saying that like you can really trace it all to the Bible. But I think you said it really right, that at the very least, a lot of similar truth can be found in the Bible. And if you really trace the origin of a lot of what we do in counseling, I do think a lot of it is biblical in nature. I love what you said about in James it says to confess to each other.
Yes,
that's super cool, and I think something a lot of Christians forget about. Right, we know we're supposed to confess to God, but actually confessing to each other before God is also what we're called to do.
Yes,
and that's what's cool about my job. Like, I know God is present in our sessions, whether or not my clients believe that. Like, I really believe that. And I can really feel the Holy Spirit working. I do pray for all my clients, often it's before sessions and after sessions. And I'll pray for myself too, right? And over our conversation. But yeah, I think always being able to fall back on that biblical wisdom is huge, and it's really important.